My name is Dr. Blanaid White from Dublin City University from the School of Chemical Sciences. I'm one of the academics who coordinate labs in the School of Chemical Sciences, and we give feedback to our students verbally on what they've done incorrectly and correctly in their lab reports from week to week. But we were finding that we were giving the same feedback week on week, and that students never seemed to be remembering or incorporating that feedback going forward into future lab reports. The aim of the feedback initiative was to move from verbal feedback to online written feedback so that students would have a repository for subsequent lab reports on what they needed to do to improve and what their feedback was on the previous reports. We developed detailed online rubrics within Loop for students for every lab report that they had to do, and then we trained the demonstrators and the other academics on how to grade the student lab reports using those rubrics, and then we made those rubrics available to the students so that they could see what they needed to do going forward to improve their subsequent lab reports. Students would do the experiment the first week, then they'd have a week to write the report, then they would submit it. Then we'd have a week to correct the report, and then we'd return the feedback to the student through Loop. Then in the next lab session, we'd meet the student one-to-one and go through that feedback with them and explain anything that was not clear to them, or answer any questions that they might have, and highlight to them areas they should focus on going forward for the next lab report. It went spectacularly well. We've incorporated it across all those labs now, and my colleagues are starting to implement versions of the rubrics in their labs as well, because students respond to it, they seem to incorporate the feedback better, and it's a win-win situation for everybody involved. What worked particularly well was the detail of the rubrics. We found after a few weeks students didn't want much detail in the verbal feedback sessions after the written feedback, because they knew exactly where they'd gone wrong and what they needed to do to improve in following weeks. Initially, students felt a little bit daunted and a little bit overwhelmed because there's a huge amount of detail in the rubrics. But when we explained it to them and they got used to using them, they found them really useful. And we actually found that after the first few weeks, they didn't want much verbal feedback after the written feedback, because they knew themselves how they could improve and what they needed to do the next week. My first main tip would be to put lots of detail in the rubric, even if it is daunting for the students at the start, that in terms of the usefulness for the students and how they used it as the term progressed, they really responded to the detail that was contained in it. And my second tip would be to use really clear language so that it's very unambiguous and students don't misunderstand what's requested of them. It's made me look to see how I can incorporate feed-forward strategies into my other teaching. And so looking at other types of feedback that have been used in the case studies, such as the giving draft feedback in the middle of semester. I've incorporated that actually in other modules because my experience with giving feedback as feed-forward has been so positive.